Hello everyone, I'm so glad you could join me here at Red Pine Quilt Shop in Detroit Lakes, Minnesota. I'm Connie, and today I want to talk with you some about large print fabrics and how to best use them and plan how you're going to be using them in your quilts. If you're like me, I visit a shop and some of these fabrics just have to come home with me even though I don't have a plan. Let's take a look at some. I noticed that most of the fabrics are printed with the fabric. However, this one is an example of a print that is printed with a direction length of fabric. You'll want to be certain that you're noticing if there's a directional print. Sometimes the prints have no direction. You notice these bicycles are every which way. That gives you a lot of freedom when you're cutting your blocks. You really don't have to worry about, is this right side up or will they be on their head? I've noticed a majority of the fabrics are printed with the fabric. I have some great examples here. So one of the things you're going to want to decide is how big or what size can your blocks be. So I made this little window, and look what happens if you're doing, say, a 4-inch square. You completely lose what this is about. But look what happens if you move it out to, this looks like maybe a 7 or 8-inch square. Or if you were to do a strip. Look at Santa over here. Again, a small square or a triangle, you're going to lose the image. But look what happens if you even do like a 5-inch. If you were to do even a larger, this looks like maybe about a 10-inch. You're keeping the image. Your fabric's still going to tell its story. So be aware of if there's a direction and how large the print is. Sorry about this one being upside down. Here's one where you could actually fussy cut quite small pieces or larger ones. This could be quite a nice strip horizontally, and it's small enough that if you wanted to do the strip vertically, you could. So there's several ways you can think about using the fabric: squares, horizontal strips, and vertical. We are in Minnesota, so here we go, twins. Now this is a small print, so you could do the smaller squares. You could also do a fairly narrow strip. Now I've used this one as an example. You're going to want to make adjustments for the seam allowance. If you were to do a strip like this, you would notice that your next print probably isn't going to be so useful. So again, it's all about thinking ahead. Will you be needing extra fabric if you're fussy cutting? Do you need to have extra fabric because you're going to be making larger squares? Let's take a look. So we have a lot of these prints that are seasonal, themed prints. I've also noticed that a lot of these prints are natural or Northwoods. Any of these would make a beautiful quilt. So we've talked a little about the direction of the fabric and the print, how large it is, the shapes that you might use. So I found some patterns that can get you thinking about your best choices. A large width of fabric. Here we have the vertical. See how this would be very easy to have a quilt with a lot of impact using these large print fabrics. Another horizontal. A vertical. Then you can fussy cut squares. more squares, and some other squares, small squares, and strips. A table runner is an excellent way to use these fabrics. I've got another table runner here with this larger print in the middle. If you were going to cut that up into small squares, you really wouldn't know what it was. So it has a lot more impact with the larger pieces. So a couple of them, these were the table toppers. And here's one that uses the rectangle and also the strips. Now, I know that in the construction of this pattern that you flip a couple of these, so you would want to really watch if you had a directional, if you were flipping or deciding to keep it just one direction. Large blocks, strips of different sizes. It's easy to imagine these fun prints being used in these quilts. Perhaps you use, like this Christmas print would be really nice, almost as a panel. Again, some larger sections, and then the narrower rectangles. Here's one that I think could make a very nice quilt using these large prints. And not to forget what I have behind me, there's this quilt that has vertical and horizontal, and you see there are some prints there that you wouldn't want to cut those up too much. So we've talked a little bit about these large scale prints, their direction, maybe some things to consider when you're cutting and purchasing, allow extra fabric, fussy cut, that kind of thing, so you don't get partway through your project and find out that you're stuck. I have had some ways that I've used them. This was a leftover of a print, and this is going to be a little doll quilt. It's the back. Now on the front, I've decided to use part of the back as the binding. And you'll notice I'm going to be having these little butterflies here and there. But it still complements as a binding. You could also use these completely disregarding the overall print and use them as a strip for, say, the faux flange. The colors would all coordinate with your top, or maybe as the binding also. And I'll admit, some of my favorites that came home with me, I was stuck on what to do with them. So here's ways that I use them. Let's come over here, it's easier. So technically, this one isn't really a large print, but I thought this fabric was way too pretty to cut up. And I like the way it goes together as a backing. Here's a top where the colors were definitely inspired by this backing. And I didn't have to match it. I just added other colors that complemented it. This is an easy way to really use these fun large prints. Now you notice these quilts have been well loved. So here's the front and the back. Again, just a length of the fabric and then a corresponding color. So I hope that you might find and go and look for some of those large print fabrics that you have in your stash and have some ways to think about them and how to use them, whether it's for backing or if it's going to be for the front, and how to best use them. I do have one last thing to show you. I really don't like to waste fabric. So when you're finished with your bindings, your backings, and everything else, maybe you go to the panel plaid quilt. This was some leftover that I had from the binding of that little doll quilt, and I'm going to sew it into my panel plaid pieces. It's not big enough for anything else, but it'll be a nice addition to the panel plaid. Well, thanks a lot for watching today, and good luck with your projects.